Hi everyone, welcome back. You're the reason these stories matter. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop us a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 1. Homecoming. The July heat hit Broderick Brody Harlow like a punch to the chest as he stepped off the military transport at Fort Benning. After 3 brutal tours with the Army Rangers in some of the most dangerous corners of the Middle East, he was finally home. His duffel bag swung lightly at his side, a feather compared to the burden he carried from years of violence, sacrifice, and silence. Brody pulled out his phone, expecting a message from Melanie, his wife of 12 years, telling him she was on her way. Instead, his stomach lurched as he read, "Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." He froze in the sweltering Georgia sun, motionless while soldiers streamed past him, reunions unfolding, laughter echoing. But for him, only silence. The words burned into his vision, unraveling everything. Their last video call just 3 weeks ago had felt normal. Tense, maybe, but not final. Sure, they'd grown distant during this last deployment. But this? His thumbs hovered over the screen. Fury surged. Dozens of biting replies formed and vanished. But what he typed was quiet. Chilling. As you wish. Anyone who knew Brody knew the weight of those words. He wasn't a man of outbursts. In chaos, while others screamed, he became colder, sharper, calculated. As you wish was what he whispered before carrying out some of the most lethal missions of his career. He made a single call. The voice that answered was crisp, composed. Leona Fisk speaking. "It's Brody Harlow. I need your services. Now. I thought you weren't back till next week. Plans changed. Can you meet today? For you? Absolutely. My office. 2 hours." Brody climbed into a cab, destination, downtown Atlanta. Not home. Not to the house where Melanie and their kids, Trevor, 16, Amelia, 14, allegedly no longer wanted him. No, he was headed straight to the office of one of Georgia's most ruthless divorce attorneys. As the cab pulled away, he shut his eyes for one fleeting moment, just long enough to let the betrayal sting. Then he buried it. Like every mission before, this one now had a target. And Broderick Harlow never failed a mission. Chapter 2. Opening moves. Leona Fisk's office was a temple of polished surfaces and quiet menace. Every line sharp, every detail calculated. And so was she. Platinum hair in a tight knot. Eyes that sliced through your soul before you even sat down. Brody laid it out, start to finish. She leaned back, arching a brow. She waited until your boots were on U.S. soil to tell you not to come home? That's cold. Even for me. I need clarity, Brody said flatly. Then I need options. Leona smiled, slow and lethal. That text. As you wish. What did you mean? It means I'll honor her decision to end this marriage. But it'll happen on my terms. Good, she said. The weak try to save what's already dead. You're not here to win her back. No, his voice was ice. I'm here to win. For the next hour, they sketched out what Leona called the nuclear option. By the time he left, Brody had signed a series of documents that would detonate at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning. Legal, financial, precise. He checked into a hotel, then made one more call, to Wyatt Dennison, his oldest friend. They'd grown up in rural Pennsylvania, joined the military together. Wyatt had left the service 5 years ago. I need eyes on the house, Brody said after catching him up. I need to know who's coming and going. You think there's someone else, Wyatt said, not a question. I need proof. Details. I'm on it. And Brody, I'm sorry, man. By nightfall, Brody's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Melanie. He let the calls go to voicemail. Then came the texts. What did you do? Answer your damn phone. You can't just disappear like this. At 10:37 p.m., Wyatt's message came in. A stream of photos followed. A midnight blue Audi. A tall man with expensive hair. Melanie, beaming at the door. Their embrace was too practiced, too easy to be new. His name is Preston Hayes, Wyatt's text read. Real estate developer. Been in your house 6 times in the last 2 weeks. Kids know him. Brody set the phone down. Calm. The picture was clear now. That night, he slept, deep and undisturbed. The sleep of a man who knew exactly what came next. At 9:17 a.m., his phone erupted. This time, it wasn't Melanie, it was her lawyer. A man named Rutherford, his voice practically screeching through the phone. You have no legal right to touch her trust fund. 19 missed calls, and this is what you pull. This is extortion. Brody ended the call without a word, turned to the window, and allowed himself a small, cold smile. Phase 1, complete. Chapter 3, The Soldier's Shadow. Brody's path from a Pennsylvania farm to elite Army Ranger wasn't paved with privilege, but with grit, discipline, and a sharp tactical mind. The youngest of 4 sons, raised by a widowed father, he quickly learned that brute strength wasn't enough. While his brothers brawled through life, Brody studied it, quiet, focused, dangerous. He met Melanie Stanford during his first leave after Ranger School. She was magnetic, brilliant, confident, deep in her law studies at Georgetown. Their connection ignited fast and hard. Within 6 months, they were married. Her old-money New England family barely concealed their disapproval. Then came Trevor. Brody was stateside, teaching tactics. Life was good. Melanie's career climbed. His did too. But after Amelia's birth, his missions stretched longer, grew deadlier. And every return home felt colder. Then, during his second deployment, Melanie's father died, leaving her a trust fund wrapped in ironclad legal protections. One clause denied spousal access without explicit permission. Another froze the fund if she divorced, unless she remarried or turned 55. What Melanie never knew. Brody had spent years dissecting financial law like a battlefield map. Not for greed, just to understand the systems that controlled lives. And buried deep in her trust was a dormant clause, one that activated when a spouse abandoned the marital domicile. By sending that text while he was in transit home, Melanie had unknowingly triggered it. Brody hadn't taken a cent, but he had legally frozen the trust, locking it tighter than any vault. Now, sitting across from Leona for their follow-up meeting, she slid a folder toward him. "You were right," she said. "Preston Hayes isn't just a fling. He's her ex-law school. Pre-you." Brody didn't flinch. The timeline. Leona flipped a page. 18 months. That's when the receipts start. Hotels, dinners. Just after your last deployment. 18 months. While Brody cleared compounds and buried brothers, Melanie was rekindling something old. Something safe. And the kids. His voice cracked, barely. Leona hesitated. "Hayes has been playing house. Trips. Gifts. Trevor's not buying it. His social media screams resentment. Amelia, she's more accepting." Brody clenched his jaw. What about the house? Any shady finances? No new mortgages. But the property next door? Bought 6 months ago by one of Hayes' shell companies. Brody's eyes narrowed. "They're not just building a life," he said. "They're replacing mine." "They've been meticulous," Leona admitted. "But not perfect." She tapped another page. 3 months ago, Hayes wired her 200 grand. "She used it to redecorate your home. That's marital property, modified using funds from her affair. She's also covering expenses from your joint account. That's another mark." Brody nodded. "It's a start. But I need more. Something that gives me an edge with the kids." Leona met his gaze. The courts leaned toward the mother. "No," Brody said. "They lean toward stability. Safety. Find me something that shows she can offer neither." As he stepped out of her office, his phone buzzed. A message from Wyatt. "Got something big. Usual place." That meant the old diner on the edge of Atlanta, where they'd once mapped out leave plans and battlefield memories. Brody entered, spotting Wyatt in a back booth, still military straight even in civilian clothes. "How bad?" he asked, sliding in. Wyatt pushed a flash drive across the table. "Depends how you define bad. Your wife and her boyfriend? They're not just playing house. They're planning a new one. In Costa Rica." Brody's eyes darkened. "Property bought. Schools contacted. Plans made. When?" "Next month. Right after school starts." "The kids don't know." Brody picked up the drive and slipped it into his pocket. The game had just escalated. "How did you get this?" Brody asked. Wyatt gave a grim smile. "Let's just say Mr. Hayes needs better cybersecurity for his cloud storage." Brody nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what he'd just learned. His family wasn't simply moving on. They were preparing to vanish. A new life. A new country. Without him. The cold within him solidified into something sharper. "I need one more thing," Brody said. "Access to the house. Not to confront them, just to retrieve something that belongs to me." "When?" Wyatt asked. "Tonight. They'll be at that charity gala downtown. The kids are with his housekeeper at the lake house." Wyatt studied his friend's face, sharp, unreadable, mission mode. "Brody, whatever you're planning is necessary," Brody finished. Their eyes locked. No words needed. Combat had taught them this kind of communication. Always, Wyatt said at last. But remember who you are. Brody's smile was thin. I see. That's exactly what I'm counting on them forgetting. Chapter 4, Buried Truths. From the outside, the house looked unchanged. The same colonial facade nestled in the upscale neighborhood. But the moment Brody stepped inside, he knew. It wasn't his home anymore. Gone were the warm, worn leather couches. The personal touches. In their place, sleek, modern furniture in sterile grays and designer blues. The walls, once covered in family memories, now displayed abstract art and emptiness. Melanie had erased him. Brody moved like a ghost, cataloging every change. In the office, he found what he'd come for, a wall safe tucked behind a painting, still locked with Trevor's birthday. Inside, his grandfather's World War II medals, service documents, a sealed envelope. He took only the envelope. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Blueprints spread across Melanie's desk. He snapped photos quickly. They were architectural plans to merge their property with the one next door. Hayes' property, a sprawling estate, dated 14 months ago, 4 months into his last deployment. Before he left, Brody made one last stop. Trevor's room was frozen in time. Sports trophies, gaming posters, teenage clutter. And on the desk, a framed photo. Him and Trevor, smiling on a fishing trip 3 years ago. The last photo of Brody left in the house. Amelia's room had changed. Rich purples, silver accents, sophisticated beyond her years. On her bulletin board, concert tickets, school awards, and a photo. Amelia, Melanie, Preston, at a ski resort. Smiling, unified, a perfect little trio. Brody left as silently as he had entered. He placed the keys, still functional, on the kitchen counter, precisely where Melanie would find them. The next morning, Brody sat across from Harris Bentley, a former intelligence officer turned PI. I need everything on Preston Hayes, Brody said. Surface isn't enough. I want the rot. Bentley, slight but sharp-eyed, nodded once. Everyone hides something. How deep do I dig? All the way. While Bentley got to work, Brody executed the next move. He contacted Trevor's lacrosse coach, arranging a chance encounter after practice. When Trevor stepped out of the field house, he froze. Dad, Brody kept his voice calm. I'm here, son. Trevor's face was a storm. Shock, anger, disbelief. She said you weren't coming back. It's been 4 days. Where were you? I had to get a few things in order. Your mother said I wasn't welcome. Trevor's jaw tightened. She said you left us. Chose the Rangers. Said you didn't want a goodbye. Brody's breath hitched, but he didn't show it. I never said that. Trevor's eyes flared. She told us you wanted a clean break. I see. Are you getting divorced? The boy asked quietly. Looks like it. Because of Preston? In part. Trevor scowled. I hate him. Acts like we owe him something. Amelia's into it, but I'm not. They talked for 30 minutes. Brody careful, measured. He never spoke ill of Melanie, but he let Trevor see the gaps, the cracks. When Melanie's SUV rolled into the lot, Brody stood. I have to go. But Trevor, no matter what happens with your mom and me, I'm still your father. That never changes. As he walked away, Trevor called after him. Dad. Brody turned. You just gonna let him take everything? Brody's face was unreadable. Calm. Focused. No, son. I'm not. That evening, Bentley returned with his first report. On paper, Preston Hayes is clean. Rich. Connected. Respected. But, Brody asked. Bentley's smile was razor-thin. But there are inconsistencies. Such as, Harris said, 3 former business partners who suddenly sold their stakes in Hayes Developments for pennies on the dollar. A building inspector who vanished into a different career after greenlighting one of Hayes' more controversial builds. But here's the kicker, there's a pattern. Brody leaned in. Go on. He targets wealthy, married women. Their husbands? Often military. Politicians. High-level execs, frequently gone. He slides in, friendly, supportive, helpful. Starts as a business advisor, ends up as something else. Divorce follows. Hayes stays. So does the money. And Costa Rica? Harris's tone darkened. That's where it gets dangerous. He owns property there, sure. But the area is a known haven for people escaping legal and financial consequences. No extradition. Minimal oversight. He's isolating her, Brody said. Cutting her off from everyone and everything familiar. Exactly. The The sale of your house is already moving forward, set to close in 3 weeks. That's why she wants the divorce pushed through fast. They're liquidating, preparing to vanish. One more thing, Harris added. That envelope from your safe, what was in it? Brody looked him squarely in the eye. Insurance. A contingency I hoped I'd never need. Inside the envelope had been a notarized agreement made years ago between Brody and Melanie's father. In exchange for signing a strict prenup, Brody's military earnings were protected through a separate trust, set up by the father, independent of Melanie's fortune. It had never been filed with the primary documents. Quiet leverage. Combined with Harris's intel, it was enough. Brody dialed Leona. It's time. Set the meeting. They want the trust unfrozen immediately, she warned. Then tell them I'm ready to talk. Tomorrow. Your office. 2 p.m. And if they don't come, they will, Brody said calmly. Melanie's running out of time. Chapter 5. The Awakening. The air in the conference room felt electrified. Melanie sat across from Brody, her expression a polished mask, but her eyes betrayed tension. Rutherford, her attorney, radiated fury. This is harassment. Financial manipulation. Extortion. Leona leaned back in her chair, unbothered. My client acted within his legal rights. If Mrs. Harlow had waited until he actually returned from deployment before changing the locks and freezing him out of his home, we wouldn't be here. Melanie finally spoke, voice clipped. You weren't due back for another week. Deployment schedules shift, Brody replied coolly. But your plans were already in motion, weren't they? What plans? Rutherford snapped. Brody slid a folder across the table. Inside, property deeds, international school applications, plane tickets. Melanie paled as she flipped through the pages. How did you get this? You were going to take my children out of the country without my consent. That's parental kidnapping. It's just a vacation property, she snapped. And you've been absent most of their lives anyway. Absent serving my country, Brody said, voice low. Not absent by choice. Melanie's composure cracked. Every deployment. Every re-enlistment. That was your choice. You chose the Rangers over us, every single time. And you chose Preston Hayes long before my last tour, Brody said. 14 months ago. That's when the joint property plans were drafted. Rutherford shifted uncomfortably. Let's focus on the trust. I'll unfreeze it, Brody said. Melanie exhaled in visible relief. Too soon. Under 2 conditions. First, the kids stay in Atlanta through the school year. Standard joint custody. No international travel without court approval. Reasonable, Rutherford agreed. Second, Brody turned to Melanie. I want the truth. Not about Hayes. About what you told our kids. Melanie's jaw tensed. I don't know what you mean. You told them I abandoned them. That I didn't want a goodbye. I was protecting them, she snapped. What was I supposed to say? Your father might come home in a coffin. But hey, stay optimistic? No, Brody said quietly. You were supposed to tell them the truth. Trevor never said he didn't want to see me. You said that for him. Neither did Amelia. That was your manipulation. The room went still. Even Rutherford's practiced composure faltered. I want you to correct the record, Brody continued, voice like steel wrapped in calm. Tell them the truth. Then we talk about the trust. And if I refuse? Melanie snapped. Brody slid another document across the table. The agreement I made with your father. Melanie's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. Her eyes scanned the familiar signature, the notarized stamp. The color drained from her face. He would never. He did, Brody said quietly. Your father respected service. He also understood your talents. This was his way of making sure they didn't hurt the wrong person. A long, brittle silence followed. Then Melanie exhaled sharply and nodded once. Fine. I'll tell them. But this doesn't change anything, Brody. I wouldn't want it to, he replied coolly. I'm not trying to stop the divorce. I'm trying to stop the damage. That evening, a text lit up Brody's phone. It was from Trevor. Mom told us what really happened. Why didn't you just call? Because I needed to be sure I could keep my promises, Brody wrote back. No more deployments. I'm here now. A pause. Amelia's mad at Mom. She's been crying in her room. Brody's chest tightened. Tell her I'll see you both this weekend. My place. You have a place? I will by Saturday. The timeline was accelerating. Fast. Brody needed stability. A home. A plan. And he needed to neutralize Preston Hayes before things got worse. Harris Bentley's deeper dive had revealed troubling patterns. Hayes' entire model is built on real estate manipulation, Harris explained. He uses shell companies to buy undervalued land, inflates the value with minimal upgrades and shady appraisals, then flips it to investors, usually women he's dating or connected to through family. Is it illegal? Only if they don't know. And in most cases, they don't, not fully. 3 of his exes lost millions before realizing what he was doing. And Melanie? She's already sunk $1.2 million from her trust into his Costa Rica project. The land exists, but the infrastructure's a mirage. Permits are stalled. Projections are fabricated. Brody processed this grimly. So once she's there, isolated, cut off from her lawyers and her family, he owns her. Exactly. Brody exhaled. His anger had never wavered, but now it was laced with something unexpected, concern. Melanie had betrayed him, but Hayes was a predator, and she was prey. I need court-admissible proof, Brody said. I need to move fast. What are you planning? Harris asked. Brody's eyes were hard, focused, to give Preston exactly what he thinks he wants. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. Preston Hayes was a man who thrived on control, on charm, on strategy. So when Broderick Harlow requested a one-on-one meeting at Hayes' sleek downtown office, curiosity overruled caution. Mr. Harlow, Hayes greeted, rising from behind his desk. His handshake was firm, his smile rehearsed. This is unexpected. Brody took in the man calmly, the tailored suit, the polished confidence, the soft arrogance of someone who'd never known war. I thought it was time we spoke. Man to man. Appreciate that, Hayes said, gesturing toward a chair. Though I'm not sure what there's left to discuss. Melanie's made her choice, Brody said, remaining standing. I'm not here to dispute it. I'm here to offer a resolution. One that keeps us all out of court. Hayes' brow lifted slightly. He was listening. You want Melanie. The house. The life, Brody said bluntly. I've accepted that. But if this goes the legal route, it's going to drag. Months. Maybe years. He let that sink in. Nobody wins. Least of all the kids. And what are you proposing? Hayes asked warily. A clean break. I sign off on the divorce. I waive interest in the house. I even support the relationship. The word tasted like ash, but Brody forced it out. In return, I want secure, court-approved access to my children, and a settlement that reflects what I gave to this marriage. Hayes studied him, cautious, calculating. That's surprisingly reasonable. Melanie said you were uncompromising. Military service teaches you to pick your battles, Brody replied, and how to reposition when the terrain shifts. I see, Hayes said, leaning back with the ease of a man used to winning. And what would this financial settlement entail? $2 million, Brody said flatly. A fraction of what drawn-out litigation would cost you. You seem very confident in your estimates, Hayes noted, brow arching. I've done my research, Brody replied, calm and unblinking. On everything. Something in his tone made Hayes pause. For a second, the polish cracked. But only a second. I'll need to speak with Melanie, of course. Of course. But the offer expires in 24 hours. That's not much time. I thought you were a man who knew how to move fast when opportunity knocks. After Brody left, Hayes immediately called Melanie. He relayed the meeting with barely contained smugness. He's desperate, Hayes said. It's perfect. A clean break. Then Costa Rica before winter. It feels too easy, Melanie said, her voice sharp through the wire. Brody doesn't quit. He's a soldier, not a strategist. He's playing at something. He is, she replied. You just don't know him like I do. Even if he is, what can he do? Hayes scoffed. The trust is open. The house sale's moving. Everything's in motion. And the kids? Melanie asked. We'll play along with custody for now, Hayes said smoothly. By the time we're ready to leave, they'll prefer our life. Especially with the schools we've lined up. And if he fights the relocation, it'll be too late. Trust me, Mel. Everything's falling into place. They didn't know Harris Bentley had wired the office the night before. Every word, recorded. Every lie, every manipulation, every intent to commit fraud, captured. It was all Brody needed. The next day, Hayes called. He'd accepted the terms. They'd meet in the morning to sign the papers. That evening, Brody met with Leona. This is risky, she said, flipping through the files. That recording, judges don't like entrapment. It's just a failsafe, Brody replied. The real power is in the financials, the fraudulent investments, the clear intent to violate custody agreements. Leona looked up. And you still want to warn Melanie? After everything. This isn't about her anymore, Brody said. It's about protecting Trevor. And Amelia. Everything was in motion. Phase 3 would begin at 9 a.m., the exact moment Hayes believed he'd won. That night, a knock came at Brody's hotel room. He opened the door and froze. Amelia. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her eyes burned with purpose. Mom doesn't know I'm here, she said quickly. Trevor helped me sneak out. Brody ushered her inside, heart thudding. Amelia, you can't just. Why didn't you fight for us? She blurted. You came home and just vanished. Why didn't you come see us? I was told you didn't want to see me, Brody said gently. You believe that? Her voice cracked. After everything, I wrote to you every week. I emailed whenever I could. I waited. Brody knelt in front of her, suddenly aware of how much he'd missed. How much she'd changed. I'm fighting now, he whispered. I swear to you I am. Mom's selling the house. We're moving. Far away. No, you're not, Brody said firmly. Not unless you choose to. Amelia stared at him. Preston says you can't stop it. That you signed everything. Preston doesn't know what's coming. What does that mean? It means some people wear masks. And sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to take those masks off. Are you going to hurt him? She asked, wide-eyed. Not like that, Brody said softly. But yes, I'm going to stop him from taking what's mine, including you. Amelia nodded. Good. I hate him. Brody's chest tightened. Why? He acts nice when Mom's around. But when she's not, he changes. His voice dropped. Changes how? He talks to us like we're stupid. That's not all, Amelia whispered. He told Trevor to man up, stop missing you. Told me I needed to grow up, because you never really cared about us anyway. Her voice dropped to a tremble. Last week, he grabbed Trevor's arm. They were arguing. It left marks. Brody's blood went ice cold. The fury he'd kept under control crystallized into something deadly. When Thursday, she said, eyes flicking away. Trevor wouldn't let him into his room. They yelled. Then Preston grabbed him. Does your mother know? Amelia shook her head. Trevor didn't want to say anything. He said it'd just make things worse. Brody inhaled slowly, pushing the rage down, forcing clarity to the surface. Amelia, I need you to go home now. But tomorrow, everything changes. I promise you. After safely getting her home, Wyatt running quiet escort to avoid detection, Brody made one last call. We need to accelerate, he told Leona. And there's one more piece we need to play. What changed? Everything, Brody said. Hayes crossed a line he can't uncross. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The Hayes Development Group offices crown the 27th floor of Atlanta's most prestigious tower. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, the air thick with money and power. At 9 a.m. sharp, Brody arrived. Hayes was already there, flanked by two attorneys, radiating smug assurance. Mr. Harlow. He greeted smoothly, standing to shake hands. Glad to see reason prevailed. Brody didn't move. Where's Melanie? She needs to be present. Hayes' smile flickered. She trusted me with the financial details. She'll be here to sign later. Brody's voice was calm, firm. That won't work. I want all parties present. One of the lawyers shifted uneasily. Mr. Hayes indicated Mrs. Harlow approved these terms. In writing? Brody asked. I have her power of attorney for business matters, Hayes cut in. This isn't business, Brody replied. It's our children. Our future. Either she's here, or this meeting ends now. Hayes' jaw twitched before he forced a diplomatic nod. Let me call her. As Hayes stepped away, the door swung open again. Leona entered, sharp as ever, followed by a man in a dark suit. Clean cut, no nonsense. Mr. Harlow, Leona said briskly. Apologies. Agent Donovan was caught in traffic. Hayes turned sharply. Agent Franklin Donovan, the man said, placing a badge on the table. FBI, Financial Crimes Division. I'm here to observe, for now. Panic crept into Hayes' eyes. His attorneys exchanged alarmed looks. What is this? He asked. Insurance, Brody answered coolly. Is Melanie on her way? Hayes, rattled, nodded. She'll be here in 20. Perfect, Brody said, sitting down. Plenty of time to review new documents. Leona handed folders around the table. These outline a pattern of securities and wire fraud across 3 states. 7 years' worth. Hayes laughed, but it was brittle hollow. This is absurd. You're trying to extort me. No extortion, Brody said. Just exposure. He leaned forward. You've manipulated romantic partners into fraudulent real estate investments. Melanie's just your latest mark. And now, assaulting my son. That's a lie. Hayes barked. I never. We have photos. Brody cut him off. And witnesses. Right then, the door opened again. Melanie entered, heels sharp on the tile, eyes sweeping the room with growing confusion. What's going on? She asked. Preston? Why is there an FBI agent here? Mrs. Harlow, Agent Donovan said, nodding. Please, take a seat. We were just discussing your investment, Leona added smoothly. The Costa Rica development. My investment? Melanie's eyes darted to Hayes. The $1.2 million transfer, Brody supplied. Villa Paraíso. Melanie's face froze. That wasn't an investment. That was our property. Our retirement home. There is no retirement home, Brody said softly. The development is fake. The land. Undeveloped and worth less than $100,000. That's not. Melanie's voice faltered. He showed me plans. Photos. Renderings. Stock photos, Leona said, sliding a fresh folder in front of her. Plans from other projects, recycled to maintain the illusion. Here are the actual property records, Leona said, sliding the final folder across the table. No permits. No real development. And the bank transfers, showing exactly where your money went. Melanie dropped into a chair, pale and silent, her eyes glued to the damning evidence. Preston, she whispered, tell me this isn't true. Hayes' confidence cracked completely. Melanie, it's a misunderstanding. The project is in early development. The development doesn't exist, Agent Donovan interrupted, voice flat. We've been investigating Mr. Hayes for 18 months. Your husband's evidence simply moved our timeline forward. Melanie turned to Brody, eyes blazing with betrayal and disbelief. You knew? I suspected something was wrong, Brody said. When I saw the Costa Rica plans. The investigation confirmed it. Hayes snarled. So this was a trap. You set us up. Brody's reply was cold and even. Not us. Just you. Melanie was never the target. She's just another one of your marks. Hayes' attorneys were already packing up, murmuring about needing to consult with their partners. And what about Trevor? Melanie asked, her voice barely audible. What did you mean assault? Brody slid a single photo across the table. A close-up of Trevor's arm. Bruises, unmistakable, in the shape of fingers. Thursday night. Trevor refused to let him into his room. Melanie stared at the photo, then at Hayes. Horror swept over her face. You hurt my son? He was being disrespectful, Hayes stammered. I barely. The slap came fast and loud, echoing through the room. Melanie's hand trembled from the impact. You lying bastard, she hissed. You promised. Mrs. Harlow, Agent Donovan said gently, stepping forward. We'll need both you and your son to provide statements. What followed was chaos. Agents escorting Hayes out in handcuffs, his attorneys scrambling to control the fallout, and Melanie agreeing, shattered and shaken, to cooperate fully. When the room finally emptied, only Brody, Leona, and Melanie remained. Why? She asked softly, staring at Brody. After everything I did, why would you still protect me? Brody met her gaze. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Trevor. For Amelia. They've been through enough already. Tears welled in Melanie's eyes. What happens now? Now, Brody said, rising to leave. You tell them the truth. All of it. Then we can talk about what's next. He turned toward the door. Did you ever love me? Melanie called after him. Or was I just a mission? Brody paused in the doorway. I loved you enough to let you go when I thought that's what you wanted. And I loved you enough to stop you when I realized you were walking into danger. He looked back at her one last time, but not enough to forgive. Chapter 8, Aftermath. 3 weeks later, the legal battlefield looked entirely different. Preston Hayes was under federal indictment, facing multiple counts of fraud and financial crimes. His assets were frozen. His charm? Useless. The FBI's probe had widened. 6 more victims across 3 states. Melanie had moved into a modest apartment. The Grand Colonial sat silent and empty, tangled in the wreckage of civil proceedings. Most of her trust had been salvaged, thanks to swift legal maneuvers. The Costa Rica scheme? Dismantled. Brody had settled into a 4-bedroom home, 15 minutes from the kids' school. He'd accepted a job as a corporate security consultant, steady, structured, the kind of post-service career that still made use of his skills. Custody was split equally. No court battles. No games. Just a quiet agreement to keep the children's needs first. Trevor had already claimed the biggest bedroom at Brody's. Mostly mine, he declared. Amelia was still navigating her tangled emotions, present but cautious. On a crisp fall Saturday, Brody sat on the deck, sipping coffee as Trevor practiced lacrosse in the yard. Amelia was inside, pretending to read, but clearly listening from the open window. Brody and Trevor both let her. Mom says she's sorry, Trevor said suddenly, halting his stick mid-spin. Like, constantly. It's kind of annoying. She's got a lot to be sorry for, Brody replied, carefully measured. You ever gonna forgive her? Brody didn't answer right away. Forgiveness isn't simple. I can co-parent. I can respect her as your mother. But what she did to our marriage, that's not something I can just undo. Trevor frowned. That feels kinda harsh. Maybe it is, Brody said. But some wounds scar. That's just truth. Trevor lowered his stick, thoughtful. She said she got caught up in Preston's world. The money, the attention. Said she felt important again. And did she feel unimportant with me? Brody asked, voice soft but curious. Trevor hesitated. She said when you were gone, she felt like she was always just waiting. And that scared her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But the possibility of something else. Something new. Chapter 9, Resolution. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. The terms were fair, negotiated without spite, without fire. The custody arrangement had held strong, steady. The children thrived in their new routine. 2 homes, but one foundation of peace. Preston Hayes, once so polished and untouchable, now faced 8 years in federal prison. A plea deal had spared him a trial, but restitution would haunt his finances for decades. Brody's security consulting firm had flourished. His military instincts and precision had translated well into the corporate world. He brought in 2 more former Rangers, brothers in arms, now brothers in business. Together, they built something solid, something honorable. On a warm spring afternoon, Brody stood at the edge of a packed stadium, watching Trevor play in the state lacrosse championship. His son moved like a storm across the field, sharp, fast, relentless. Beside him, Amelia cheered like a girl with nothing to hide. On her other side, Melanie watched quietly, close enough to show unity, far enough to honor distance. He's really good, came a voice beside Brody. He turned to see an athletic woman with curly brown hair, watching the game with an appraising eye. He works for it, Brody replied. Scholarship potential, she noted. I'm Vanessa, by the way. College recruiter, Northwestern. Brody Harlow, he said, offering his hand. Number 17's my son. He's got excellent stick control. Reads the field well. They talked easily through the first half. Vanessa was sharp, observant, confident, someone who didn't fill silences, but shared them. At halftime, Amelia tugged her dad's sleeve. Hot chocolate run. Want something? Water. Thanks, he said, handing her a few dollars. Ms. Harlow, Vanessa asked, gesturing politely toward Melanie. Can I get you anything? Melanie blinked, startled. Oh no, thank you. And it's Stanford again. I've gone back to my maiden name. Mom, Amelia said sweetly. Come help me carry stuff. Transparent. Clumsy. But heartfelt. As they walked away, Vanessa smiled. Smart kid. Not subtle. Brody chuckled. They think I need to get back out there. And do you? She asked, no hesitation. 6 months ago, Brody wouldn't have recognized the question, let alone entertained it. But now, for the first time, the idea didn't feel foreign. I might, he said. Eventually, she smiled. He nodded. Eventually. Well, when that day comes, she said, handing him a card. Maybe we start with coffee. Talk about your son. Or not. Their fingers brushed, just briefly. Before he could answer, the whistle blew. Game on. Trevor's team won by 1 goal. Nail-biting, loud, unforgettable. Afterward, the celebration spilled into Trevor's favorite burger spot. Melanie bowed out. Work, she said. So Brody had the kids to himself. Who was that woman? Trevor asked between bites. The one from the field. College recruiter. Northwestern. She liked your play. She gave you her number. Brody tried to stay composed. For recruitment purposes. Trevor rolled his eyes. Sure, Dad. You should call her, Amelia chimed in. She was pretty. And smart. That's rare. Brody laughed, but said nothing. Later that night, after dropping them off at Melanie's, he returned to a quiet house. He placed Vanessa's card on his desk. He didn't call. Not yet. But he didn't throw it away, either. His phone buzzed. Trevor can't stop talking about the Northwestern recruiter. Says she might be the one. Just a heads up, our son is planning your wedding. Brody laughed aloud. Thanks for the warning. I'll manage expectations. A moment later, Melanie replied. You deserve happiness, Brody. I mean that. He stared at the message for a long time. Then typed back. So do the kids. Thank you for today. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement. They had moved beyond the war. Separate lives now. But forever tethered by two people they both loved more than anything. The next morning, Brody laced his running shoes and glanced at Vanessa's card. He picked it up, slipped it into his wallet. The war was over. He had protected what mattered most. Held the line. Stayed true. And now, he was ready to begin again. As the dawn stretched gold across the horizon, Brody stepped outside, the morning air crisp with renewal. His mind returned to the message that had ignited it all. Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over. And his reply? Calm, precise, as you wish. Not surrender, not submission, but the quiet resolve of a man who knew some wars are won not with noise, but with clarity, with patience, with purpose. He hadn't begged. He hadn't broken. He had met the betrayal with discipline, turned pain into precision. The battle had come, and it had been fought, cleanly, completely, and without compromise. Now, for the first time in years, Broderick Harlow was not a soldier in someone else's war. He was home. And this is where our story ends. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more. Tap the next video on your screen, and I'll meet you there.